Hi, this is Ruth Sanderson again, and we're going to be looking at how to color brick and fire and other things on my version of Cinderella using Prismacolors. So today I'd like to talk also a little bit about how I always pull colors that I use in one area around the entire picture. This is how you create a unified color scheme. So I'm pulling, to create the brick, I'm pulling the color that I used for her hair, which is henna, and I'm going to use one of the reds, the magenta red, and one of the browns that I used, I think that's the light umber. So I'm going to be layering a number of these to make the bricks. But now I'm going to actually go back and go into the shadow area right under the overhang of the stone, and I'm going to define the grout in between the bricks with this one of my favorite colors, which is I believe ginger root. This will be listed in the credits. So ginger root. So that's good for the warm shadows of the bricks. So anywhere there's like a shadow, like on the side of the bellows, it's sort of in shadow, but I'm actually putting a little detail in there. So I'm not using white in the shadow area, obviously, because I want it to be darker than white. So now I'm going to go in and accent the light areas, which are pretty light in terms of the grayscale, but they're not really 100% white. So the white pencil does go over these areas and make them a little lighter. Just a couple places. For the most part, I'm leaving the white of the paper. You don't have to color every single area in a picture. If an area is going to be white, you can leave it white. So I'm going to choose the this brown, the light umber, which I used for the shadows of her corset, I believe. I think there's a little in the cat and a little in the shadow of the stones. I used this color a lot in the stones. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time demonstrating this, the brick. It probably would take at least an hour or so to do the brick. So you notice I'm layering the colors. Sometimes I'm just using the straight color. So what I want to do is get a multicolored brick wall here, so it's not all the same color. Brick often is not. They're not all the same color. So it just adds a little interest in it, and this will sort of tie in those colors. I've got to find a way to make that bright red hair harmonious with the rest of the picture. So I've got to get some nice warm reddish browns in the rest of the picture. But I started doing that with the cat. He really kind of matches her hair reasonably well, although he's yellower. But so I'm going to take a little more time here, and then I'm going to sign off and work on it on my own a little, so that you're not too bored. But this will just sort of give you the idea of layering, putting a lot of color over these bricks, and just mixing it up randomly. And I'm just touching in between those hairs. So here's I've done the entire wall. I also did behind the stove with a little darker. And now I'm going to burnish, and this is a little bit of a different way to burnish. You can go in with the Gamsol again, But you could also just go in with a lighter pencil. In this case, I'm using actually a peach, which is on the, the warm side, reddish warm. And I'm burnishing each brick, and notice it's making it a little smoother. But I kind of wanted a bit of texture in the brick left, so I chose not to completely blend it with Gamsol. I've done another version of this, and I did blend it with Gamsol, and it looked fine, but I might blend the shadow underneath behind the stove, the shadow area of the brick. I think I might blend that with Gamsol to make it really sink back there in the shadows. But first I'll burnish it a little with this. I'm going to actually switch back to ginger root and burnish a little with the ginger root, which is a bit of more of a neutral color than that peach. But this whole area is a little too light, so I'm going to end up putting some layers on and darkening the shadows in a little while. And some of these bricks need a little more color on them, but I'll go back in later and play with them a little bit more. Just sort of to give you a general sense of how to do this, how to do brick. I think things always look more interesting if they are not completely uniform. Okay, so I'm finishing up burnishing some more of these bricks, and I'm going to go back in and darken up some of these areas. Okay, so I've got dark umber here, and I really want to accent the shadow areas. Now this that's sort of the stovepipe that goes up, so I'm going to be playing with that a little more later. But I'm just going over these bricks now with a layer or two of the dark umber to really make that shadow area sink back. Outlining the handle. And while I'm at it, I'm going to darken the bricks underneath the overhang of the stone face of the fireplace. And while I'm here, I'm going to outline the accent So that's a little peg, and the bellows is hanging off this little peg. So I'm going to define some of those those edges, because with the grayscale everything is pretty soft. So I'll find some of the little edges and define them. And later at the end we'll work on coloring the bellows. So I've got this pencil. I'll define some of these other areas. I like to use a combination of, for something that's black, I do like to still add some warm tones into it. Especially in a picture that is overall warm. I wouldn't want to have really too cool highlights with the black. So I'm just sort of outlining the edge of the stove. I will eventually end up going over this with black and a gray, and then I'll I'll burnish it also. So I'm defining some of those bricks in the back a little more strongly, but that whole area needs to be sort of a unified, even dark tone. Not super dark. I don't want it to look black, but I want it to sort of almost disappear back there a little bit. The shadows are always more soft and muted, unless you want someone really to look in the shadows, and shadows aren't that important. So to make them a little soft and muted helps the rest of the picture stand out. Not every single area of a picture needs to have the same amount of detail, and indeed it shouldn't. So I'm starting to just define some of the edges of the stove also. Okay. So I worked on this a little more. I took a break and did some accenting. Notice at the end of the underneath the stone at the edge of the fireplace. Now I'm going to define this the light coming through from the coals. So this is a hot fire, and so we use orange, straight orange at first, little yellow orange, just to make that a really bright, glowing fire. I'm also going to use this color on the pot, on the copper pot. I'll make this a copper pot to, again, pull in those colors from all around. It's like the color scheme. So this pot will really look, very similar to the colors in her hair, and it'll help unify the whole picture by having more of these warm colors in another area in the picture. I'm using even a bit of a lighter. Now I've lost my highlight, so I'm going to go back in with cream. Actually went a little too far too fast. In retrospect, probably should have started with the cream and then gone with the orange. But this needs a few more layers of different colors, and I'm going to use the henna for the shadow. And there's always a little bit of reflected light in the shadow area too, so I'm leaving that edge, that back edge, and I'm going to put a little more color, a slightly brighter color back there eventually. Orange. So often the reflected light is the brightest color. And the reflected light is never as light as the light side of an object. So I think for the pot, I want it to be a really cool looking shiny, shiny pot. And so I don't really want that pencil texture in the pot. So this is a case where I will go over, and I am here, going over the pot with the Gamsol to really smooth out the rendering. Doing that pretty quickly. It's a little. And while I'm at it, I would like to have that that shadow back there, really recede into the distance. And so, unlike the bricks in the foreground, I don't really want to see much of the texture, especially the paper texture, showing through at all in that really far background. So, and while I'm at it, I'm going to just pull in and cover the stove, the shadow of the stove, the shadow the pot's making on the stove. And so that shadow area becomes sort of a unified, even tone. And that's another aspect of good design when you're doing a painting, or even when you're doing a coloring. It's like, well, you can make an area stand out by putting light against dark, dark against light. But if you want an area just to sort of merge and sort of recede, have it all be one value, and especially in the shadows can kind of really blend into each other, like I'm doing here. And so I'm using this sort of semi-dry, really just sort of experimenting here. Again, I'm pretty new at using the Gamsol for blending, but I've been an artist for 40 years, so the main thing that I finally learned is basically to have no fear and just go for it. And then, if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can often fix it, or it doesn't have to be necessarily perfect. So if I were doing this as an illustration for a book, I'd be probably a little bit more careful than this, and I'd spend probably a little bit more time than I am now. But I wanted to have these demos be pretty quick and show you, that you don't have to be too afraid to just put color on and push it around. So here I thought, in the shadow, again, maybe making some of that texture disappear in the shadow area would make the rest of the bricks really stand out. Okay, I think I'm going to tackle the bellows, and have a nice sort of bright yellow base to it. The The good thing about yellow, sometimes you can put yellow as a base for a lot of things, and it just, you know, it serves to really help unify whatever object or area you're working on. You know, that yellow base will kind of unify the rest of the colors that you put on top of them. So you can really see here how, you know, how transparent colored pencils really are. You know, it's very, very hard to completely cover up the gray, especially with the light colors. So you get some really interesting effects. Now I'm gonna, those are pears, if you probably can't tell. There's two pears in the center, and I'm gonna make them pear color, and then so pear color, sort of defining the edge a little. So just continuing to work on the pears, outlining them with the, I believe this is goldenrod. And then I'll go in actually with the only green so far in the picture. Just have some little accents of green here. Nothing too bright. This is probably the only spot I'm going to use it. I might later just put a little bit of a green accent in the hanging herbs. It's a little row of triangular accents, and I'm using the henna here, my favorite warm brown. It's a nice light brown. It's hard to find a good light brown. You know, often browns are so dark that they kind of overwhelm. They can be overwhelming. So henna is a really nice light brown. I just create another little line accent there. Okay, I'm going to go over the whole thing with yellow again to brighten up that yellow. Give this a nice nice little accent and unify all the layers underneath. Instead of toning down that green a little more, you almost don't even notice the green, but you know, it looks fine. It's not completely out of key with the rest of the picture. I'm going to go back in again with the goldenrod and I'm going to make the metal of this bellows. This would be a brass sort of color. So just going quickly over those grommets or whatever you call them, and I'm going to take my dark brown, and this really feels like it needs some accents here. So in between each of these grommets, I'm just adding a little spot of dark brown. Defining some of the edges with a little bit of a darker area, and then you know, this the bottom part is probably made out of leather, I think, so it would be sort of like a dark leather portion down there that has those grommets. And I did accidentally cover over one or two of the grommets, so I'm going to use my magic gel pen, which I recently got, and put a few accents in here. So here's a real close-up. So I'm just going to go dot, 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 and I've hit these these little highlights. So we've got some, and then I'll highlight a few little spots on the bottom of the bellows, and I'll give a little accent to each of those little grommets. I love my new gel pen. Wow. So there you have it, and next time we'll work on the foreground, the apples, the floor, and that should be the last of this series. So see you then.